Well, good morning, everybody. I hope everyone is wide awake. I know I had a wonderful time last night at the banquet and dinner and event. So much so that I'm going to have to drink a little bit more water than usual today, so please bear with me. Before starting, I just want to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak here at this important event. And I also want to acknowledge the fact that although I'm up here speaking to you, I'm really just the messenger for this Uranium Group. I have a co-author here, Ian Lambert, one of the vice chairs of the Uranium Group, who had special input into this presentation, the development of this presentation. But I want to acknowledge the fact that this publication and this presentation would not be possible with the help of many delegates in the Uranium Group from around the world. In particular, we're led by Georges Capus of France, our chairman. We have vice chairman, along with Ian Lambert, we have Scott Sitzer from the United States, Alberta Castillo from Argentina, and Alexander Boytsov from the Russian Federation. And I also have to acknowledge the fact that our partners, not just the NEA, it's the International Atomic Energy Agency that contributes to the production of this book, and my colleague with the IAEA, Jan Slizak from the Czech Republic. And, of course, all the members, 30 plus of this group that meet and contribute data and insights and help to produce a book that truly has a global view of the industry. In the next few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of this group. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I think it's important to understand this publication and what the advantages and perhaps some of the limitations are. I'm going to talk a little bit about how this book is prepared, the process that goes through to bring together the information and develop the appropriate wording. I'm going to say a few things about some recent market developments of significance. And these recent market developments really do have an impact on probably what most of you are interested in here, and that's the projections to 2030 in terms of supply and demand in the nuclear sector and how this impacts the uranium mining sector, the view at the time that this was put together. Then I'll go on to make a few comments about the resource figures in the book. And one important aspect of this market that separates it a little bit from some of the other traditional mining sectors, and that is the time it takes to develop mines, and then end with a few conclusions. The Uranium Group, this goes back a long time. I'd like to try and demystify, if there is a mystery around this. This group was formed in the mid-1960s when the first murmurings of developing nuclear power led governments to ask the logical question: if we're going to build these big, expensive facilities that may run for 30 or 40 years, more now, but at that time, those were the lifetimes, do we have enough uranium? And how much does it cost to get this uranium out of the ground? It became a truly global exercise as it evolved over the years when we had membership from the former Soviet Union and the countries associated with that country at the time. And in 1996, this led to a formalized agreement between the IAEA and the NEA to incorporate this into a truly global group. As you probably know, the principal product of the work of this group is something called the Red Book. The formal title is Uranium Resources Production and Demand, and I could say up until a week ago that every book that has been published by this group has a red cover, but my publications department threw a curve at me this time, so we just have a red banner and a red spine, so that's the derivation of the term, the Red Book, at least. One of the advantages of this information contained in this book is that it is government-sponsored information, so it's less directly influenced by commercial concerns. The people who work on this group are nominated by governments, and the information that is carried forward to this publication is approved by government. So people, even though they may come from industry, the work on this group is representing their country. We have a formalized process that has evolved over the years that involves 3 meetings every 2 years to produce this book. The book is generally produced every 2 years. And as we are in Australia this year, we're not we're just beginning the process for the publication of the next book. The tradition has been to have one of the uranium-producing countries host these meetings. So it gives members a chance to travel to different countries in the world and view the production facilities firsthand and see the kind of practices to develop a global view and an understanding that you can't attain through the literature. You can get a lot of information, but actually being on the ground and seeing these facilities helps a great deal. Along with the Red Book, there are other publications that the group has been involved in. In 1999, there was a book produced on environmental activities in uranium mining milling, a very important subject. We cannot forget that a lot of the public perception about this industry is shaped by some of the practices in the 1960s and 1970s that led to some serious environmental damage in some countries. This book was an effort to pool the information from around the world on these practices, how they've evolved since the 1970s, and to distribute this information around the world. And it's very gratifying to hear concepts now that are common to the industry, like stewardship and best practices. And the title of this conference is a good example of that, taking these best practices to the next level. It's imperative that the industry does this. We cannot go back and have any of the difficulties that occurred in the past. So operational concerns are important, and it was very gratifying to see. Part of us went on a tour to Olympic Dam and the Beverly mines here in South Australia. And you can see quite clearly that these issues are front and center and practiced on a daily basis, and this has to be done around the world. And this book is part of promoting those activities. And especially now when we're looking at some countries that are entering this arena and have not experience with uranium mining and need to have some guidance in terms of requirements and regulatory issues that need to be looked after. In 2002, there was also a book produced on environmental remediation of uranium production facilities, particularly the ones that go back to the 1960s and 1970s that I just referred to. These left legacy issues for government, and there are a number of efforts going on today to continue to remediate these facilities that were left to governments when some of these companies folded because of difficult economic times. Again, this is something that's a very, very important message to the industry today. And one of the main themes and the main messages coming out of this book is that when you're going to open a mine, you have to plan your closure before you even start production. You do this, you leave very much less of an environmental imprint, and it costs a lot less to remediate these facilities. And those sorts of things are documented there. In our recent book, we also had a special insert from another group stemming out of this called UMREG, the Uranium Mining Rehabilitation Exchange Network, or group. And they have been meeting over the years to pool information to put the best practices into remediating these facilities, like former East Germany and some of the sites in the United States and so on. And just to note to you that this group, UMREG, continues to meet and will be having a meeting in Switzerland, Freiburg, in September this year. Another publication that just recently came out is called the Red Book Retrospective. Because these series of publications go back to the 1960s, there's a tremendous amount of data contained in them throughout the entire history of the nuclear industry. And the thought was to pool all this information and derive some conclusions about the industry, how it works, and what has worked and what maybe has not worked. And one of the things that comes clear well, there are many messages, but one of them comes clear is safety. Safety is a key to the operation of all these facilities through the nuclear fuel chain, from the mining right on through to waste disposal. When you look back at the Red Books over the year, the last time that there were projections looking forward that that considered there was going to be a great deal of nuclear growth, of course, they were way off the mark because of 3 Mile Island, because of Chernobyl. And the industry, of course, is aware of this and has to keep safety front and center to avoid deflating the balloon of expectations that we have here. Safety is front and center. We also have in preparation by the IAEA something called the Red Book Retrospective Country Reports. The first one in 2006 focused on the data. This one focuses on the narrative, the geological setting of these countries that have produced uranium or have the potential to produce uranium in the future. So this is being put together at this time. And I just wanted to make a note to all of you that I know there's a lot of meetings and it's a busy schedule, but in 2009 there is a symposium that is already being planned in Vienna at the IAEA. It's a week-long symposium on uranium mining and the fuel cycle, and you are all invited to attend that. There'll be more information coming out and the program's being formed. It was a success last time, and we're expecting that it's going to be an even greater success this time with renewed interest. A little bit about how we put this together. The Red Book comes out in 2008, but it's actually based on data in 2007, January 1st, 2007. So it's a little bit out of date even when it comes out. This was not such an issue for many, many, many years when there wasn't much activity in the market. But of course today, almost every week, there's something going on, some new development. So we have this advantage of having government-sponsored information, but because it's government-sponsored, it takes time to gather the information, the approval process, and develop the text that's agreeable to everyone. So it takes a little bit of time. In this last book, though, we have contributions from 40 countries, and it gives us, as complete as possible, a picture of developments around the world. Probably all of you are very familiar with these sorts of charts. I just wanted to make a few comments about how resources are classified here. This is really in keeping with the origins of the group. This is not about reserves. This is not about fair value. This is about how much is out there. This is informing governments how much is out there and how much it's going to cost to produce it. And I want to underline the fact that the cost of production here, you see $40 US a kilogram and so on. That includes the entire cycle of the mine, opening, production, and closure. And these things have to be considered, reconsidered today, and we're trying to encourage all governments to review these informations because, of course, the cost of production is going up. A lot of the essential fuels and whatnot are going up. So we have to continue to consider this. We have an axis here for cost. I've just mentioned we also have an axis horizontal on the bottom there that talks about geological confidence, going from resources that are really well known, clearly identified, closely spaced drilling, lots of geochemistry and other analysis, to what's called undiscovered resources there off to the right, that there are some indications, some direct measures, but a lot more has to be done to prove up these resources. But it does give governments and interested people an idea of the potential that's there and what all that's out there based on current exploration efforts. In order to put this together to give a truly global picture, there was a lot of effort in the 1990s in particular put into harmonizing the different schemes that countries use to classify their resources. And there's just a smattering of different countries here and how they might line up to the Red Book classification. This was a very challenging exercise in the 1990s. And today it's still a matter of some concern. You'll see down at the bottom there something called the UNFC, the United Nations Framework Classification Scheme. This is an effort by the United Nations to have a common classification scheme for all energy resources. And part of the activities of the Red Group is seeing how our scheme will line up with theirs. The UNFC is fundamentally different, but we have to keep in mind how it might line up with the Red Book classification scheme. The spot market price, one of the fundamental market developments over the last few years. The market determines this price. I have no insight on what the price is going to be in the future. That's up to the market to determine. If I did have insight, I'd probably be doing something else other than talking to you now. I will make a few observations, though. You look about 2003, when the price started to nudge up after a long time slumbering. I think it was the market sort of awakening to the fact that because there hadn't been investment in this industry for a long time, the supply chain was very thin. And there were some difficulties in some of the mines and one of the conversion facilities that really emphasized to the market that, yes, this is thin. If we have some difficulties in these facilities, the whole supply chain could be disrupted. That led to the price rising through 2005, and then in the fall of 2006, Cigar Lake Mine, which was under development in Canada, took on water and delayed this development. It was going to bring something like 7,000 tonnes to the market, and the price really started to take off at that point. Around this time as well, there was a new element in the market. Speculators were interested in seeing these price changes. These are people that have no interest in using the fuel in any generation of electricity, but are playing the market for profit. So I think that has contributed to some of the volatility that we see since that time. The spot market is probably the most transparent indicator in the uranium market, but the fact is very little of the uranium that's traded is actually traded at spot market prices, maybe on the order of 10 or 15%. One of the things that's published in the Red Book is a gathering of information from some governments and other agencies that monitor the longer-term prices. And, of course, the volatility isn't here, but it shows much the same sort of trend. Declining prices low until about 2003, and these prices starting to increase. And the indications are that these prices are increasing now as we speak. So why is that occurring? Well, there are probably a number of factors that play into that. There's rising expectations of new nuclear build for a long time, so increased demand for this fuel. The market has been supplied by what we call secondary sources during the 1970s when the last expectation of huge nuclear growth was going on. A lot more material was mined that was ever needed. And one of the advantages of uranium is it can be stored for a long time, and this inventory has fed the market. And the market perception is that these inventories are starting to decline. And there have also been fluctuations in the dollar, particularly the US dollar, that have played into this as well. If we look back over the longer history of some of these dynamics, you see here the spot price in the dollars of the day in pink. In blue, the spot price expressed in 2007 dollars, the fluctuations there. And then in yellow, the exploration and mine development expenditures globally over those years. Again, this 20-year period of slumber after the excitement and activity and mining exploration in the 1970s. A lot of that exploration leading to the discoveries that are still feeding the mines today. And in recent years, as the price is going up and the indicators are that more of this fuel is needed, this raw material is needed, we're seeing the exploration sector respond. Just a note of caution here, the last dot on the yellow line for exploration actually shows it dropping off, but that was the expectation when the book was put together in 2007. And the preliminary indications are that this exploration trend is continuing to increase, but we'll have to see when we gather the data next time around. As one would expect, particularly with uranium, you put more money into exploration and you're going to find more. And this is clear in the new Red Book. We're seeing increases in identified resources on the order of 17–15%, depending on the category you're talking about. You're seeing a decline in some of the low-cost to reasonably assured resources based principally on reevaluations in Kazakhstan and Niger. And we're also seeing this category of undiscovered resources, and this is not just a number that somebody pulls out of the air. This is based on regional geological surveys and techniques that are used to come up with reasonable estimates here, but we're seeing an increase in that as well, just as you expect when you see the price increase. The other market development that I mentioned earlier has to do with nuclear power. After a long slumber, there is a great deal of expectation now that there will be quite an expansion of nuclear power around the world. There are a number of factors that are playing into this, and we heard some of our speakers yesterday address these factors. Of course, climate change. Nuclear power is a very low greenhouse gas generator. Security of supply, an issue for many countries around the world. And uranium is widespread. It's produced by countries, long-standing trading partners, under a framework that works very well. Also, the nuclear power plants, particularly since the 1990s, have got an excellent safety record and are performing even better than expectations when they were built. We're seeing many examples of plants having their lifetimes extended on the order of 10 or 20 years, and we're seeing a trend around the world where these reactors are upgrading their power. So they are producing more electricity, they're running longer period of time. And this plays into the economics as well, and there are a number of analyses that suggest that indicate that nuclear power is competitive, even without a carbon price. And of course, when the world gets around to actually valuing carbon, because it's a low carbon generator, this is going to make it even more of an economically advantageous way of generating electricity. And we heard yesterday about some of the projections of demand for electricity too. Everyone needs it, everyone wants it. So these are some fundamental changes that are going on the demand side of the market. So when we put together projections, these are not predictions. These are the state of play, the state of thinking of governments around the world at the collection time in 2007, and some of this may have changed now. And, dealing with the future is always difficult. It's difficult to make predictions. But projections, this is based on the information that we have now from governments, the kind of things that we expect to see in the next few years going out to 2030. If we look at just the North American sector first, we have high and low projections there. And it seems pretty clear that there is going to be growth in nuclear. Canada is moving forward, has selected sites now. There is much talk of building several reactors because of the increasing demand and the need to replace some of the reactors that have run for a long time there. Mexico is included in this group too, and they're uprating their 2 reactors now and considering building more. We look at Western Europe, the picture's a little bit different here. As you well know, there are countries with nuclear phase-out plans. Some of them are reconsidering. A good example here is Italy, which shut down its nuclear plants in the late 1980s, vowed never to go back, but their new government is now talking very aggressively about building nuclear, recognizing that they're importing all of their energy supplies and wanting to have some independence. And there is indications in other countries as well that these plans for phase-out are being reconsidered, but as yet, there's nothing really solid to indicate that that's going to change. So with the age of these nuclear reactors, we're seeing a gradual decline, a projection of a gradual decline through 2030. Look at East Asia. For the low and the high, quite a different scenario. Of course, this is being driven by China, but also by long-term plans for nuclear energy that are being implemented by Korea and Japan. So growth, clear growth there, and a fair degree of growth. If you look at Central Eastern, Southeast Europe, similar sort of picture. There are many countries in this grouping in Eastern Europe that have long history with nuclear power, are quite comfortable with it, and are moving forward with plans to build more. 2 reactors are being built in the Slovak Republic now, Bulgaria, and others are all looking at replacing some of the older ones or adding capacity there. So we're seeing clear indications of growth in that region. And others, a large catch-all of different countries and different regions, including South America, where in Argentina and Brazil they're moving ahead with plans. The African countries, many talking about nuclear power. India, Southeast Asia. It's a common theme around the world. So even with the decline in Western Europe that we're projecting now, we're seeing an overall growth here that will go from something on the order of 370 gigawatts in 1970 to a low for the world of 509, or a high case scenario here of 663. So clearly this growth is happening, and to fuel that, of course, you need uranium. So what we do to put together the supply-demand picture is ask countries to classify their mine development and their production capability in a couple of different classes. Something that we call existing and committed. These are the mines that are operating, that there have been feasibility studies, plans, and firm commitments to build. And we're seeing a rapid increase projected here of production capability in this category. When you look at planned and prospective production centers, not as well developed, but having the resources defined and look likely to move ahead with the right sort of market conditions, we see even greater growth in the capability of production here, looking on to 2030. Well, how does that compare to our requirements? We look at the low demand scenario that I just outlined for you, convert that into uranium required, and the high demand. So I guess we can all go home now. It looks like our job's done. There is a great deal of plans, a great deal of activity with this rejuvenated market, and one could even look at this and a simple message might be that, oh, we're headed for an oversupplied market. But be careful. You look at the actual production from these facilities and you see the kind of challenge that's laid ahead here. When we talk about mine capability, this is the rated capacity of the mine, and these curves in blue are taking on face value that these mines are going to produce on time, and they're going to produce at 100% capacity. And we know from past history this generally does not happen. We have production now that's probably in the order of the last few years 75 to 80% of production capability. So there's work to do there to improve the production at these mines. We also have a market that you can see the production is way, way, way below the reactor requirements even in 2007, the dark line there, and that's because of these secondary sources that have fed the market for a long time. And the perception is, particularly when we get into 2013 and beyond, that these secondary sources are going to decline in availability. So there's a clear challenge here and a clear opportunity for the uranium production sector to develop these mines, improve production, and meet these requirements that we see coming forward. If we look to 2030, these high and low reactor requirements might be on the order of 94,000 tonnes of uranium a year in the low case to almost 122,000 tonnes of uranium a year in the high case. And right now, we're just above 40,000 in terms of production. So clear challenge, clear opportunities. I mentioned mine openings and the time it takes to develop. Well, first, where is this production going to come from? We look at our data assembled around the world. This is just a snapshot of a few of these production centers that are either going through expansions or are looking at openings. The actual red book has about a page and a half of these when you look through it. I picked a few here to illustrate a few points. One, the importance of Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has been developing production more rapidly than any other country in the world, and it is looking to continue that trend over the next few years. There are a number of other important facilities, Namibia, Canada, Niger. Again, looking at developing a rather large mine, 5,000 tonnes a year capability. In Canada, I've already mentioned Cigar Lake, 2011. We're hearing yesterday maybe 2012. Again, here's something that's going to bring a lot of material to the market when it's operating. In Russia, the Russian Federation, we have the Elkon deposit, 5,000 tonnes, a lot of activity to bring that to fruition. And of course, here in Australia, we're looking at the potential expansion of Olympic Dam that could bring feasibility not yet completed, but could bring quite a large chunk of uranium into the market. But it is not easy to develop these mines. It takes time, it takes resources, it takes a healthy market. If we look back over the history of some of the mine development of those that are operating today, you can see that it takes a number of years. Now, this is the past. This is not the future. In the past, of course, I've already outlined, the market was not as strong. There wasn't a strong incentive for producers to make these big investments to bring these mine developments forward very quickly. Today, that's changing. We're hearing in Australia about the Four Mile deposit that might be going from discovery to production in 5 years. Quite a different picture. But the challenge is there. It's clear. It's not just the investment climate, but the regulatory regime. Regulations don't get any easier. They tend to get more and more challenging, more and more difficult, take more time. And it's heartening to hear that there are governments like in Australia and Canada that are considering the regulatory regime. Not to lessen the regulatory requirements, we have to have a strong regulatory regime, but to avoid the duplication, the time-consuming processes that slow some of this mine development down. A couple of words. I think I'm running on a bit too long here. I'll try and finish off quickly. Uranium resource history, you look back over the long history documented in the Red Book, and you'll see that these reasonably assured resources have been relatively constant over time. They bumped up in the 1990s when we had more countries joining from the former Soviet Union, and they're bumping up now recently because of the exploration effort that's going on. And this is in spite of mining over 2.2 million tons of uranium. So it's not a static picture. Mining doesn't, it depletes some of the resources, but with exploration, the resources just continue on increasing. Here's another way of looking at it, the higher cost category, $130 a kilogram, from the 1980s, when the classification scheme kind of settled on what we have today. You can see that even though production in black is continuing on and on and on, we see resources not being depleted, but actually increasing as this exploration effort continues. Those are our conventional, our traditional sources of uranium. And I just want to take a minute to point to the fact that there are other, what we call unconventional sources of uranium out there, phosphate rocks, a whole number of other categories that contain generally low concentrations of uranium, but are a potential source if the economic conditions are right. And the Japanese are one of the few countries that are even continuing to look at seawater as a possibility, virtually unlimited source. Still very, very expensive, not a prospect today, but something that probably should be kept in mind. There are things also that I think speakers yesterday made the point that once through fuel cycle, you're using less than 5% of the energy contained in the uranium. There are technologies available, practiced today in France and the Russian Federation to reprocess this material and derive more energy from it. There are things that we call categorized as waste up until recently, like enrichment tails, that with sufficient enrichment capacity, some of these can be taken and combined and made into fuel. So there's a tremendous amount out there. And we see a number of countries are considering are moving toward this closed nuclear fuel cycle as part of their plan, recognizing that from a sustainability perspective, you should get as much energy as possible as you can out of this material. Part of the Red Book retrospective exercise was looking back at the history of requirements compared to production. And I mentioned there was a lot of production in the 1970s in particular. And if you do a very rough sort of mass balance calculation, you end up with 650,000 tonnes potentially that have been mined but really haven't been used in the reactors. This is a very rough figure. It's a very rough estimate, but it gives you some idea of the potential amount of material out there. The vast majority of this has been used in the military, not the most open organizations around the world, but we can be assured that the majority of this has gone into military. Its form, its availability is not well known, but we can see from a very successful program that the U.S. and the Russian Federation initiated some years ago that this highly enriched uranium in warheads has been detuned and blended down for uranium fuel, taking 13,000 warheads out of service and providing electricity at the same time. So tremendous potential there in terms of technology and making better use of the material that's already been mined. So a few conclusions. We've got a lot of it. Uranium resources are plentiful and they're increasing. It's not a fixed number at all. It's shifting with economics. There we have potential for, we have enough uranium now to even take care of this high growth scenario to 2030. And if you take all the undiscovered resources potentially there, it's enough for hundreds of years. And if we develop and use more widely these other technological opportunities that I referred to, you're looking at thousands of years of energy here. So the potential is almost unlimited. Of course, for the uranium sector, this reminder again, turning resources into production, developing the technology, takes time and investment, so we need this kind of healthy market condition to move forward and these expectations of growth. That's all that I have to say.
Sure. Any quick questions for Bob? Thank you, Bob.
Excuse me, Mark. We do have a question here.
A question.
Robert, could I ask a two-parter? Firstly, Western Europe with high, though not the highest per capita greenhouse gas emissions and arguably a pressing case on energy security grounds, is the Western European demand position sustainable? And my second question is that given the need to speed up production, is there a case for more active engagement with governments in order to persuade them to examine their regulatory and policy frameworks for uranium mining with a view to shifting to a more fit-for-purpose framework?
Well, I can answer the second question pretty easily. Yes, there is a case, indeed. We're seeing examples from around the world, Australia, Canada, my home country, where you have duplicative regulatory processes split between the provinces and the federal government. And there are efforts to try and trim this down and make this more, make more sense out of this. Not to relax the regulations at all, but to make the processes move along more quickly. And clearly, there's a case for that if you look at the kind of scenarios that we're talking about and other agencies are talking about. With respect to Europe, is it sustainable? I don't know. I mean, this is a difficult issue that's being discussed almost on a daily basis in Europe and by the EU. I think the EU, even though some of its members are vehemently opposed to nuclear power, is now coming to the recognition that if it is going to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 20% by 2020 and on into the future, it has to have nuclear power as a part of its mix, and it has to look at the regulatory frameworks and maybe the design approval process and get the conditions into a little bit better shape so people can position themselves to make these sort of investments. And we're seeing some movements there in some countries, but in the traditional Western countries, Western European countries, not a lot of movement yet. But I think the stones are being laid for that to take place. And you know, Europe is talking about huge reductions in carbon dioxide emissions. Nuclear energy is not the entire answer, but it has to be a part of this package of technologies that are going to be used to achieve that.
Thank you. I'm a geological consultant, but this is well outside my field, of course. But the ISTR experiment you must be aware of, and if it's successful in the early 2020 range, or looks like it's going to be, it's obviously going to change the energy picture as the groups actually starting to think about the consequences of this.
Sorry, the ISTR?
Yes,
Can you explain
the
that?
fusion experiment
Fusion.
that's happening in Europe after the one in Britain.
Well, yes. I mean, this would have a tremendous impact on how we make how our energy source, if it is ever developed and proven to be technologically, economically feasible. There's a lot of money being put into that, a lot of effort being put into that. It's something that's on the horizon, something that should be kept in mind, but the reality is we have to deal with the technologies that we have today going forward. One of the important aspects of the time that we live in now is that a lot of the generation fleet around the world is aging, and it's time to think about replacement. So there are decisions that are going to be made in the next few years about which technology are we going to choose, and these facilities last for decades. So this is an important time right now, an important time for these decisions. Fusion could be important, but right now it's not at a stage where it can be a part of that consideration, in my view.
Bob, Peter Waggett. Very good. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Always a pleasure. Just to clarify the situation with UMREG, the meeting will be in Freiberg in September, around the 14th from memory, and that will be a one-day session within the Uranium Mining Hydrogeology Conference, number 5, run by Broder Merkel in Freiberg, near Dresden in Germany. And if anybody's around, you're welcome, because UMREG is a free deal.
Okay. Thank you for that, Peter.